The Babadook is a 2014 Australian-Canadian horror movie revolving primarily around the relationship between a mother and her young son, played by Essie Davis and Noah Wiseman. And interestingly, this movie was written and directed by Jennifer Kent as her first movie. And I have to say, even if it wasn't her first movie, this would be a fantastic film. As her first film, this is superb. Not many people make a first film as good as this. You think of directors such as Spielberg with Duel, which is an amazing film, but very few directors get it so right at their first attempt. And she really did with this film. Now, I would not be given this film as much praise when I'd first started watching it, because in effect, I actually started watching this film on 2 occasions before getting through the entire thing. And it wasn't because it was overly scary, it was actually because I just didn't like the film. The first 10-15 minutes of the movie are extremely depressing and dour. But on watching it the second time, to really get a full, broader view of the film, I enjoyed it so much more. Now, the first 10-15 minutes or so still feel the same. But after watching the entire film, you see why that's the case, and why it's so important that that tone is there. Now, without spoiling anything, the film, as the name suggests, also involves a monster, the Babadook, or Mr. Babadook. And I have to say that the Babadook is one of the best monsters, in my opinion, of recent years. The Babadook deserves to be as iconic as the Freddys, Jasons, Michael Myers, etc. It really is that grade of monster, and it's not even shown that much in the film. One of the things that I love the most about the Babadook as a character is the use of audio. Many monsters and psychos and creatures in films rely heavily on jumping out and going boo. The Babadook doesn't. In fact, the way that the whole film builds the terror is completely different to the way that most horror films do. There are almost no jump scares in this film. It's slow jump scares, in that you do expect something to happen, but it builds to it slowly, and never really jumps out at you. But it's more effective that way. Now, the film wasn't a huge financial success initially, and it only made $7.5 million from a $2 million budget, which is unfortunate because more people need to see this film. But critically, it has done pretty well, and that's unusual to do critically well without doing financially well. And that's a real shame when you see that happen, because if you're a horror fan especially, you really will appreciate this film. It's horror on a more clever level. It's not just a slasher, it's not a gore fest, it's clever horror. And the great thing about the Babadook as well is that you can actually decide how much you want to look into the film. You can either view it as a straight up monster film, or you can consider it to be a metaphor. And I like that. Films with layers are very, very cool. Now, as far as our individual ratings, we first of all, of course, have the story and plot. And for the Babadook story and plot, I'm going to give it a 7, because it's not the most crazy or overly intellectual of plots. It's relatively simple, just about the relationship of a mother and son and how they are dealing with a particular incident, which is basically the cause for the entire film. So it's not overly complex, but as I've said with a lot of other films previously, it doesn't need to be. It does well with what it's got. So overall, it's a 7 from me. As far as the characters and their motivations, I'm going to give the film a 9. And I have to say that's primarily due to the character of the Babadook. Now, I don't want to paint a false picture of this film. Don't expect to be going into it and getting an in-depth backstory or loads of on-screen time from the Babadook as a monster. It's just not that kind of film. But in the development that the Babadook gets, it's a fantastic monster. And the characters of primarily the mother and son are people who you don't necessarily always root for, especially at the start of the film, but they are intriguing. And I found personally, the son in particular gives an amazing performance, because usually I find child actors extremely annoying, and although sometimes in the film he gets a bit loud, That's understandable from a kid, and he's a very interesting kid. Some would say weird, I would say interesting. And overall, the characters are relatable and very complex. They're certainly not two-dimensional body bags to get thrown around by the metaphorical monster. So overall, for the characters and their motivations, I'm going to give it a strong 9. As far as the visuals and effects, again, I'm going to give it a 9. And although this film doesn't show as much in the way of crazy effects as some other films, the visual effects, especially in the creepy aspects of things, are used very well. There are some very select moments in the film where the use of lighting and shadows in particular is fantastic, and I love the look of this film, especially as it progresses more through the movie. The film has a very washed out look. The colours are all drained from the film very deliberately, and I love the way this film looks, especially as it gets more and more creepy. So overall, it's a definite 9 out of 10 for me on that. As far as the audio and soundtrack, I'm actually going to give it even higher, a 10 out of 10. And the main reason for that isn't for the music. The music is good, although not overly memorable for me personally, but what is fantastic, and the main reason why I'm rating it so high, is because of the sound effects of the monster in particular, or the things surrounding the monster. They're brilliant. They're not extremely loud, stupid, silly, annoying jump scares which don't scare anyone, they just annoy you. They are extremely creepy, tense, and beautifully eerie noises used in the film, which I absolutely loved while watching it. It certainly won't appeal to everyone, but if you're a horror fan, you'll love the sound effects in this film. So overall, I have to give it a 10, because it really drew me into the film. And finally, for the rewatchability and entertainment factor, I'm going to give the film overall a 7. Because although it's definitely not the kind of film which I'd want to watch over and over and over again, it's definitely a film which I want to go back to more than a couple of times. And it's the kind of film which, although it's not a mystery as such, definitely has the feeling that you can notice more things each time you watch it. And I like that. It means that you can get more out of a film with each re-watch. So although this film certainly isn't the kind of film for everyone, if you're a fan of horror, you'll love it. If you're a fan of emotional and creepy thrillers, you'll also love it. And if you just fancy trying something new, but don't necessarily want to be scared or grossed out in the traditional Hollywood way, this is a very good alternative to that. And I have to say, from what I've seen over the years, I'm extremely impressed with Australian films. They are really good and highly entertaining, not just this one, but various others that I've seen as well. So overall, as a cumulative score, this film gets a very strong 4.2 out of 5, which is a very high rating for a horror film, and it's very deserving of getting that as far as I'm concerned. So overall, as I said, if you haven't seen The Babadook, I would personally definitely recommend it. The first 10 or 15 minutes may make you a little bit depressed, but trust me, stick with it. It gets so much better as you go through the film. But that's it overall for this particular review. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.